Hi, everyone. I'm Shiri Orion. I'm the Executive Director of the American Friends of the Parent Circle. For those of you new to the Parent Circle, and I know that there are a number of people who this is your first time meeting the Parent Circle, the Parent Circle is an organization made up of 600 bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families. Everyone has lost a loved one to the conflict, to the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. And all of our members have chosen to take a path, what I think is a very extraordinary path of reconciliation and peace with the other side. And they share their stories with other Israelis and other Palestinians and all over the world to show that there is another way, that violence is not the only answer, and that if these people who have paid the highest price can choose peace, then anyone should be able to. So we have two very special members of the Parent Circle with us today, Robi Dmlin and Layla Elshiach. And I'm very excited to have them with us today. Before we get into their stories and their inspiration, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge some of the events, not only of this past weekend and week, but the past couple of months, which have been incredibly challenging times. And we are all suffering from needless death, whether it's to disease or terrible violence. And, you know, I sort of debated about canceling the webinar for today, but I was so inspired by the fact that 50 people signed up just this morning. And so I felt like, I think people really need to hear your voices today, Robi and Layla, because you know better than anyone the consequences of dehumanization. And you know better than anyone the consequences of not seeing the other side, or not seeing other people that don't look like you or have a different culture than you, not seeing them and not knowing them as human beings. And so I think that you both have a lot to offer us as Americans today. And so I'm really happy to have you both with us today. We have about an hour, a couple of housekeeping before I turn it over to Layla and Robi. We have an hour. We can't take live questions. I see that people are already sending things in the chat, which is great. Lots of hellos from friends all over the world. Someone says they're not able to hear me, but I hope that's taken care of. So you can write your questions in the chat box, and I will get them to Layla and Robi after they share their stories. You can also email a question if you're here by phone to info@parentscirclefriends.org. This webinar is going to be recorded, and so we'll send it around to everybody afterwards, and you can feel free to share that with more people. The more people that hear our message, especially today, the better. And Christopher, my colleague who is here, but is behind that black square that says American Friends of the Parent Circle, he's going to be sending important messages in the chat box, like how you can follow us on social media, how you can sign up for our newsletter, and so forth, and some answers to questions I'm sure that you'll have. So I would love to turn this over to you, Robi and Layla. Layla, this is going to be my first time hearing your story, and I'm really looking forward to that. Layla lives in Bethlehem, and she spent time growing up in Jordan. Robi, hello. I've heard your story a few times, but it's always moving. It's still moving, and I know that there's people here already who I'm sure have heard your story countless times too, and are back. So that is testament that that people want.
That is for punishment.
Robi is Israeli. She grew up also in South Africa. Both Robi and Layla are bereaved mothers. They both lost their sons, and they're both members of the Parent Circle, and they give countless dialogue meetings like you're going to hear right now to inspire hope. We all need some hope today. So Robi and Layla, I want to thank you both for being here. I think they decided before that Layla was going to go first.
Yeah, but
Go for it, Layla.
Go ahead, Robi.
Oh, no, you go ahead. Okay, we won't argue about who's going to go. I just wanted to say firstly that I'm very grateful to the people who joined us. This is a really difficult time, not only Corona, but the violence that's going on. And actually, I think that that's what makes this so much more important, because I discovered how intertwined our lives are. And watching what happened to this young Palestinian boy who is autistic, was killed on Saturday in the old city in Jerusalem, and seeing Floyd being killed in that violent way, you only can see that nobody has the monopoly on cruelty. And so the message that we bring in the parent circle is so important for everybody, and lessons can be learned of how you can stop this violence and look for the humanity in the other. I was watching a piece on CNN now of a policeman who knelt down during the demonstration, and it was so moving. And these small acts of love and of identity are what we all should be looking for. So now I'll shut up because you can never keep me quiet. And Layla, please.
Thank you, Robi, and thank you, Sherry. I want to thank everyone who's here today to listen to us, to hear our stories, and we hope to hear from you, your questions. So, as Sherry said, my name is Layla Sheikh. I'm from a village called Batir near Bethlehem. I was born and raised in Jordan. I was the seventh child for my family. My father was one of the first fighters in the Fatah organization, the first organization against the occupation. He went from Bethlehem to Jordan and to Lebanon. After that, he decided to stop being a fighter. He came back to Jordan to be a teacher for the refugees. So my childhood was very normal. There's nothing unique in it. Maybe the only thing was unique that I have a twin brother. We always make troubles to our neighbors. That's what I would like to hear. So I finished my study in accounting business, and I met my husband in Jordan. He's originally from Bethlehem. 1999, I came to Bethlehem to do our marriage. First year was amazing. Everything was new and everything was wonderful. And for every Palestinian who born outside of Palestine, it's dream come true to come back and live inside Bethlehem. So I was very happy. And our happiness became much more when we have our first child. She was a girl. Because we start to have our own family. So after 2 months exactly, the second uprising was start. That was a disaster for me because at that time I wasn't have my illegal paper to stay in Palestine.
Layla,
But
I'm sorry to interrupt you. So people are having trouble hearing you. Can you hold the microphone on your earphones closer to your mouth, maybe?
Like this?
Oh yeah, that's better. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry. So after 2 months, the second uprising started, and that meant that I should stay at home most of the time because I wasn't have my Palestinian ID. But I wasn't scared too much because I have my family to take care of. And I'd say it's okay until I could see my family in Jordan again, because at that time I couldn't see them. After 1 year, we have our second child. He was a boy. We named him Qusay. Sorry. Okay. So he was an intelligent, beautiful boy, and we love him so much. And we become much happier because our family started become bigger and bigger. Until that day, it was the 11th of April 2002. 4 o'clock in the morning, he was woke up very sick because one day before, the Israeli soldiers came to our village. They threw tear gas, and he was smelled some of it. We tried to send him to a doctor in our village, but there was no medicine at that time. So we tried to take him to Bethlehem, to the hospital, but the soldiers, the Israeli soldiers, stopped us and they said, "You can't enter, it's a military zone." So the second chance was to take him to Hebron. It's the next city to Bethlehem. But even the Israeli soldiers says again that the main road is closed. So we take a risk to take him through many villages. The road will be rough and long, but it was our only chance. Between two villages, we find another checkpoint for the Israeli soldiers. They stop us, they want to check the car, they start to check the ID of my husband and my father-in-law. We asked my father-in-law to go and talk to them because he was the only one who speaks Hebrew. So they asked him to stay in the car. And my son, every minute, become much sick, and his condition become much worse. So I was thinking to have a risk and go and start to talk to the Israeli soldiers. The risk that if they know that I didn't have a Palestinian ID, maybe they will take me to jail or send me back to Jordan and I will never see my children again. But at that time, the only thing that I was care about is my son and his health. So I went to talk to them and I started to tell them that he's in a critical condition and we should be in a hospital as soon as possible. But they didn't care and they started to laugh and they asked me to stay in the car until they allow us to move. So more than 4 hours we stay in the car until they allow us to move. When we reached the hospital, the doctors said that he's in a very, very bad condition. They take him to the intensive unit care. And the doctor told me that if he's still alive after 48 hours, he will be a handicap. So at that time, I felt that the hospital crushed upon my head. I started to cry because I didn't know what to do to him. 2 o'clock in the evening, the doctor came and he asked us to leave the hospital. When I asked him why, he said because the Israeli soldiers came and searched the hospital because they afraid that the fighters came and escaped inside the hospital and hide. But I told him, but our son inside the intensive unit care, and how could we leave him alone? And he said, because of that, you should leave. We argued a little bit, but he said, this is the rule here and you should leave. It was the worst thing happened to me. How could I left my child inside the hospital alone without anyone with him? But we didn't know anything to do. In the evening, we reached the house. So I immediately went to my family-in-law house because they have phone at that time. We didn't have cell phones like today. So I called the doctors and he started to explain his condition. So I asked him twice, what do you mean by this? And he repeated the words. Inside me, I was understand what he tried to tell me, but I refused to believe. A few minutes, my husband came and he asked me what's happening. I told him I don't understand what he's talking about. Take the phone, talk to him, put the speaker on because I want to hear him. So he repeated the same words again. So I started to shout at him, what do you mean by this? Then he said, your son's dead. And I started to cry like crazy, didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. I just felt that his word was like a bullet comes from his mouth to my heart, smash it down in many pieces, start to cry like crazy. Few minutes later, the house was full of people, neighbors, relatives, friends. But for me, I wasn't care about any one of them. The only thing that I was care about is my son and I start to convince myself that this is a dream, and it happened when I was in the car and I fell asleep, and this is not true, and everything will be okay, and I will go back again and bring my son back. But unfortunately, that was the truth. In the middle of the night, I have a dream, and I will tell you later why I will tell you this. I was asleep maybe for 5 minutes. I put my back on the wall, and I have a dream that there's a white dove stand on my shoulders, and she said to me, "Mama, don't cry. I'm so happy." Then I woke up my husband. Both of us start to cry. My grandmother, she came and she said, "If he asks you to stop crying, you should." I told her I can't because I'm sorry. So from that minute, our life became upside down. Everything was like change. And I take a decision from that moment. I will never like have revenge or get revenge from anyone. But I have a decision that I didn't want to have any kind of relationship with any Israeli person, because for me, all of them responsible about his death. And when you become very angry and full of hatred, I think this will like cover your eyes and your heart, your mind about many things to understand. So for 16 years, I was refused to have any kind of relationship with any Israeli person. Until one day, one of my friends called me and he started to talk about many things. And then he started to talk about the Parent Circle, family forums for brave families, for Palestinian and Israeli people. And immediately I told him, "Please stop talking about this." And he said, "Why?" I told him, "I didn't want to hear anything about this. You know what happened to my son, and I don't want to have any kind of relationship with any Israeli person." Then he said, "Because I know you and I know what happened to your son, I told you this." And he asked me something and he said, "Why until now you didn't tell your other children about what happened to their brother?" I told them because I didn't want them to be in this cycle of violence. I didn't want to lose any one of them because I lose one of them and that was much more than enough for me. So he said, "Maybe this will be a good chance for you to protect not just your children, even other children's, other families." At the beginning, I wasn't convinced really about what he's talking about. So after many times, he called me and he insists. One day it was a conference in Bethlehem and he invited me to go there. In the beginning, I wasn't really want to go, but he called me and he said, "Dress up, I'm in the car, I'm waiting for you because I know that you tried to find an excuse and you didn't want to okay." I told him, "Okay, okay." So when we arrived, there were just Palestinian and he started to introduce me to them. And I was really happy to start to know them. So 5 minutes maybe later, the Israeli start to came, and I was really felt that there's something in my chest acne, and I don't want to stay there, and I want to leave. And he said to me, "Stay and listen to them, and after that, decide what you want to do." And I was really shocked when I see the Palestinian and the Israelis start to hug each other and kiss each other like they are not just friends, like they are family members. And that was a big shock for me. And that was make me really sad because I want to listen. What's the thing that make them so close together like that? So they start to talk about their personal stories. And that was really touching my heart because it's the first time I looked at them as a human, as me, not an enemy as before. And for the first time, really, I felt that we share the same tears, we share the same pain. So from that moment, I decided to sit and listen. And after that, really, I asked them to be to participate in one of the projects. It was called the Parallel Narrative Project. It's about to bring people from both sides, let them sit face to face. Most of the time, for the first of both sides, they meet each other, not as soldiers, not as Palestinians who went just from a checkpoint. So we were a group of women, 15. So we sat, and then they asked us to talk about something happened during the conflict effect in our life. So it was the first time I speak about what happened to my son, and it was the first time I speak about what happened, even in front of my family. We didn't like talk about it. So I started to talk about what happened, but in the middle of the story, I stopped. I started to cry. Couldn't really complete the story because it's like open the wand again and bring all this memory, bring everything back. Then an Israeli woman came and sat in front of me, and she said, "I'm sorry." And I was really shocked and say, "For what?" And she said, "I know that I didn't do anything to hurt you, but I know the people who are responsible about the death of your son from my own people, and I'm a mother too. I could feel your pain. I could really feel even the world that you didn't say. I could understand it." And she came and hugged me, and it was really so touching and moving. This is the first time someone really talked to me like that, even from my own family. No one talked to me like that. And I felt that her word was like a sparkle, opening my eyes, my heart, and my mind. A sparkle comes from a deep, dark place, like my world. And she didn't know that by her simple words, that she really turned my life, and she bring me back to life again. And from that moment, really, I become another person. I asked them to be a member, and not just a member. I started to give lectures inside Israel, inside Palestine, and even around the world. I went to Sweden, to Italy, to Switzerland, to spread the message of peace and reconciliation. The most important thing that I discovered during my journey in the forum, that it's so simple to start to talk to people about reconciliation and peace, but the most important thing to feel from inside. And this is the most important thing. And you can't talk about this until you feel it and believe it. And one of the things that really happened to me, and I thank God about this, before I joined the Burn Circle, I always looked to myself as a victim. And you know, when you look to yourself as a victim, you will be always felt sad and angry and all these bad emotions. And you felt that there's like a big mountain on your shoulders, didn't allow you to do many things. But since you stop think about this and you stop and you start to feel that you are a survivor, your life will change a lot. And I thank God really every day that I became a member of the Burn Circle, because it's really changed my life from inside. And that even affect about my relationship with my family, my children, because they saw how much I really changed for the best. And thank you so much for everything and for listening. And I'm sorry if the sound was not good. Thank
No,
you so much.
the sound was perfect. And what an inspiring story. What a journey you've been on. Thank you for sharing with us. I know everyone is so moved by hearing what you've been through and what you've done with it. Thank you. Wow.
Oi.
Yeah, oi.
You see, this is what brings hope. When you're involved in somebody's life and you see a transformation and you understand that it's possible to change And that when you see the humanity in somebody else, that's breaking this whole barrier. And I'm sorry, I think everything is so heavy now and so full of fear that it's creating a world that is something that I cannot believe. I've been watching for the past couple of days what we do in Israel. I'm terrified of the annexation. I'm terrified for the Americans. I'm terrified for anybody black, because this is not possible, what is happening, the violence, and will there be another round of corona for you because of what is happening? And I think to myself, perhaps you know somebody who lost somebody, and the terrible part of that is they never got a chance to say goodbye. And so I'm thinking to myself, what is it that you can do to bring some solace to that person? What could they do to say goodbye? And maybe if they wrote a letter to the person that they lost, who they couldn't say goodbye to, maybe that could help. You know, I've been through so many lives since I lost David. I've seen so many people and so many extraordinary experiences of transformation in people and in myself, from this very tough cookie to somebody who could suddenly be so much more compassionate and less judgmental to others. And it's such an extraordinary experience to be able to meet somebody like Layla, because then you know that every day when you get up and you do this work, and sometimes it seems so impossible, that you're doing the right thing. And I think that now in America, I hope that maybe some of the projects that we are doing, you could adapt to do for yourselves. You cannot go on like this. We cannot go on like this. And it's the duty of everybody, I think, to take responsibility for what is happening in their community. I don't know, maybe this corona has made me a little daft because I've been at home now for like nearly 3 months. And I'm thinking to myself, what is it that I can do to make a difference? And so the more I am around, the more I believe now in restorative justice, the more I believe that the only way is for the person who committed the crime and the person who is the survivor to find a way towards each other, because that is what Layla was talking about, is that internal gratitude and peace. So, you know, I suppose there are many people here that know my story, but it's extraordinary how I begin to look at my own story and understand so much more of what actually happened. Watching the film on South Africa and seeing how different I am now. I'm so much more gentle. That's hard to believe because, you know, I talk a lot, but I see a difference in my own being. I see a difference in how do I feel about the man who killed David. It isn't that you know, when the army came to tell me that David had been killed by a Palestinian sniper, I think that one of the first things that I said is, you may not kill anybody in the name of my child. And that was actually the beginning of what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And I'm an ancient lady now, but it's just as important to me now. You see this, I have to keep throwing it down because it keeps coming back. It's like your daughter came to say hello in the middle of the talk. So, you know, and so many things have happened, and I'm so grateful for the extraordinary people along the line that I've learned from. And what happened to me in the actual parent circle, how the opportunities that I got to be part of lives of people that I never would have met before, of being able to meet somebody like Layla, to meet Bushra, who said that after 100 years, if she saw the person who killed her son, she would kill him. And today she's one of the main women in the women's group in the parent circle. And then I started to travel all over the world after Itzhak Frankenthal, the man who actually created the parent circle, invited me to a weekend in East Jerusalem to meet Palestinian and Israeli families who'd lost children. And that's where I understood that any future peace agreement, any future political peace agreement would have to have a clause for a reconciliation process, because otherwise at best all we could have is a ceasefire. I started to travel all over the world and I thought I was terribly important. And I could speak English and I landed up in Congress and in the House of Lords and in hip hop concerts and you name it. And suddenly one night, I need to find a tissue, I'm sorry. Okay, too much crying. One night I was sitting at my computer just like I'm sitting now. And there was a knock on my door, another knock. And I opened the door and there were 3 soldiers. And that can only mean one thing in Israel. And so I slammed the door in their face. And to cut a long story short, they actually came to tell me that they caught the man who killed David. And that's when my life became very difficult. You see, you can talk about peace and you can be very self-righteous and tell everybody else what they should be doing. But do you really mean what you say? And this was hard for me. And it took me 3 months to write a letter to the family, which started a whole ball rolling, which eventually landed up in jail. And Thaya, that's the name of the sniper, saw the letter, wrote back to me after 3 years and said I was mad. Oh no, not mad, you can't say that to Americans, crazy. And it gave me a license, because what happened with all of that is I gave up being a victim. If you noticed from the way that Layla was talking, she spoke about being a survivor, not a victim. And that is where the difference is. And so we went to South Africa, we made a film, we came back, and I decided time to meet with Thaya. And I got permission from Tzipi Livni, who was then the Minister of Justice. And she said yes, and I asked for Basama Ramin, one of the members of our group who lost his daughter and had spent 7 years in jail, to be the go-between. I don't use the word mediator, I don't like that word. I think go-between is a much more powerful word. And we got permission for all of that. And then, like quite usual, we have elections in Israel every now and then, as you may have noticed. We had 2 ministers of justice who would not allow any of this permission. Actually, now we have a minister of justice, new. I'm hoping that perhaps he will allow me to go into the jail. It's not that it's that important. I'm not looking for, I'm sorry. I'm looking for completion. And that's where the story is now. And I want to leave time for you to ask questions. And thank you so much for listening and for actually tuning in on a day that is so difficult for all of you, I'm sure.
Thank you, Robi. It's interesting because I feel like your story is evolving even in the past 3 months or 4 months or since I've seen you last. The world is really different. It's really I call it upside down since we last saw each other, and that is impacting all of us and who we are and our narratives. There's a lot of questions coming in, a lot of compassion, a lot of gratitude for the 2 of you sharing your stories.
I just wanted to say one thing about the Zooming. You know, I said that Zoom and Netflix need to get the Oscar, not the Oscar, the Nobel Prize. But it's actually been a wonderful thing for the group in many ways, because we can come into each other's houses now without asking permission from any Israeli army. And that is extraordinary. And we've had that feedback from women who suddenly said, wow, I can see what your house looks like now. And so there are benefits from that. And I think we should continue to meet this way if we can't meet in other ways. And we are in, for now, a very difficult time with the annexation, and one would hope that the world even in this terribly difficult time, will be able to get to the point where they will stop this madness. Because then, if we do the annexation, you will then be able to call Israel an apartheid state. I don't want to say that. It's not easy for me, but that's the truth.
Robbie and Layla, I'm going to jump into some of these questions. Oh, there's the cat.
I'm sorry, it's a new cat and it's very badly behaved and it's on probation.
Well, Sylvia wants to know, she says, we see so much investment in police, walls, fences, and military equipment, and not enough investment in health, food, education, and housing. How can you keep up this important work when the forces aligned against it seem so strong and so wealthy?
Who do you want to answer that?
You
Layla.
All right, thank you. Because we didn't build the wall, we didn't put this in.
Can you hold up your microphone, Layla?
Okay. I think maybe this is a question should be asked for Netanyahu, not for us, because this is something that I don't know how to say it, but when we start to talk to the people, we talk to the people as human, as us. Not, we didn't talk about politics. We didn't talk about peace agreements, because this is not us who will do this, because it's a government thing. But we try our best to talk to the people who's like us. We went to their houses. We went to the schools to talk to them, to tell them about stories, our dreams, our hopes. And I think this is a much more important in this situation. This is the only thing that we could do.
You know, it's so easy to give up, but we can't give up. Our children are standing at checkpoints. We see the effect of what can happen to if you change, how reconciliation can work. We cannot suddenly say, okay, we'll wait for the Messiah. Look, when I came from South Africa originally, after being in the anti-apartheid movement for many years, if somebody then would have said to me that blacks and whites would sit in the same room without trying to kill each other, and that South Africa would go through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and even as difficult as it is now, there would have been a bloodbath if they hadn't have had that reconciliation process. In those days, I would have said you were mad. But a kind of miracle happened. And I think that it's not that I'm naive, but I can't see another way for us unless we continue with what we're doing, and more so. And the investment in the work that we do, I find that the American people are extremely generous and have understood how intertwined our lives are. And we would be delighted to share the projects that we do, which would be so applicable to what is happening now. I met with many of the Black mothers after I saw them on the stage with Hillary Clinton, the mothers who'd lost children and the mothers of police officers. And we went and we spoke together in Atlanta, of all places, in the Martin Luther King Museum. And it was so extraordinary to see that there was no need for any bridge between us. We already knew. We understood each other. And so, you know, it's just, this is what we've got to do. It's not, there's no choice about this. It's not that I can get up tomorrow morning and say, okay, I've had enough. It just doesn't work like that. When you believe with all your heart that you have to do this work, and when you see people going through transformation, that is such a reward. It's such an extraordinary gift for someone to give you, that you were part of their lives, that allowed them to live again, that stopped them from wearing black all the time, that let their other children become part of their life and not them being just the main mourner. It is very often that mothers become the main victim, if you want to call it, after a death, and all the rest of the family are kind of secondary. And that's a lesson to learn. And I'm just, thinking about more than 100,000 people dying in America. I'm thinking that everybody's life has to be touched. And even if you don't know anybody, maybe you should reach out, because this is a terrible time. And as I said right in the beginning, for someone who can't say goodbye, I know what that means.
And Robi and Layla, there's some conversation happening about grief, and we were talking about this before we went live this morning about grief. There are actually a few people talking in the chat box that have lost some loved ones, not to coronavirus, but for different reasons. And the questions coming out feel different. We're grieving. America is grieving today. Israel and Palestine have been grieving for a long time. And you had some messages that you wanted to share about grief and how to acknowledge it and what to do with it. And can you share that, both of you share that with us?
Layla?
I maybe didn't understand exactly the question.
Yeah, I didn't. I guess I talked more than I asked. The question is about grief. When you are grieving, as many of us are today, what do you do with grief? How do you go on? How do you put one leg in front of the other?
It's really something so sad in the beginning, and I think in the beginning it's like control you, try to put you down, these emotions, these bad emotions, and sometimes even the reaction of the people around you, sometimes it's making you down or it's help you. But for me in the beginning, I was really, really very sad and felt of angry because there's a questions always comes to my mind that the Israeli have an excuse always when they executed someone or kill someone or be responsible for the death of someone, that maybe he threw rockets or maybe they snipers. But my child was just 6 months old when he was died. So what's the crime that he's done? And I always think his only crime that he's a Palestinian. So I think it's in our hand. How could we control this? And it depends background of how we raised and our religion sometimes. Because during this time, during the conflict, someone of my friends tell me something, some scripture from the Quran said, I will say it in Arabic first because I want to remember it and translate it to English. It said, لا تزر وازرة وزر أخرى. It means that you can't judge many people because of mistake of one person. So I said, so I was judge all the Israel because of mistake of 4 soldiers. And that was a stupid thing that I've done maybe. And that start to, like when you start to, day after day, you start to think about what happened. And I remember my father was said once before I get married, he said, the person who think of revenge is the weak one because he want to find a simple way to deal with his problem. So I think the background of any person, it's help you for his grieving, how could he deal with it. And I think it's different from person to person, from situation to situation. Thank you.
You know, everybody grieves in different ways. I think that what saved my life in many ways is that I got up and tried to do something. It doesn't mean you have to join the parent circle, but there are things, you know, some parents die with their children, not physically, but they die and they do nothing because they can't face the world. And I'm not judging anybody. Some people build monuments because that gives them a reason to be. Some people go to the cemetery every day to look after the grave because that's a continuation of motherhood in many ways. But actually, I found something that was so meaningful for me in my life. And, you know, I think one of the cleverest things you can do if you are around bereaved people is not to give them advice. People were very keen to tell me what I should be doing and how I should be feeling. All you need to do is be there. But, you know, now is such a new thing for everybody around you. And even if you don't know that person personally, if it happens to be a neighbor or somebody in your village or your town or wherever, and you reach out to them, just write them a note. You have no idea how many wonderful people during the coronavirus have been sending me emails and how important it is, and phoning and sending just a message to see if I'm okay and still in the land of the living. You know, it's just a sense of still belonging, a sense that people understand your loss, because I can tell you, your life will never be the same, but you will learn to live with it next to you. And what you do with your life is so important. And because you will now have a voice that will be listened to, use it. And try and encourage people who lost children or somebody or a father or anybody. Yesterday there was a memorial service on CNN. I'm a news freak. And it was so beautifully done. They had a rabbi and a priest and, you know, and an imam and many people who told the story, because one of the most important things about the parent circle is this gift that we have to be able to tell our story. And if you have somebody who's lost somebody, ask them to tell you their story. Because what will happen, it's like in the beginning when the Palestinian mothers come to the parent circle, they've never had a chance to tell their story. Layla is just an example for you. And they tell their story, and the more they tell their story, at some point, they will start to talk about the person that died. And that is the next step in healing. Just reach out, just be who you are. Don't give advice. You can just be there. You can cook something. You can just, it's also okay to laugh, you know? And that empathy which people will feel is the most extraordinary gift that you can give to somebody who's lost somebody. And write letters. I'm a big letter writer. Mm-hmm. I have a whole book of letters to David that have been cathartic for me, because there is this sense when you lose somebody that you might forget, or that you would be disloyal if you stopped being a victim. But if you actually give up being a victim, it's the most freeing thing that you can have in your life.
We're all eager to see those letters, Robbie, when they're published and bound in a book.
Well, what is interesting is that I decided that it wasn't enough just to write letters to David, but because Thaya is so much part of this whole story, I wrote letters to him as well. And on the 3rd of March, I was coming back from Washington on the train. I love that journey from Washington to New York on the train. And that's where I got inspired to write a letter to Thaya to ask him how he felt on the 3rd of March, which was the day that he killed 10 people. And maybe if he'd made another choice in life, he would have been free now and had another life altogether. If he'd met David or somebody who understood his humanity.
I have a question from Barbara. Barbara says, for me, the most important group to impact are young people, the next generation who has so little contact and opportunity to humanize the other. What opportunities have you had to hold these person-to-person experiences with young Israelis and Palestinians? And many of them need to share their experiences and receive an empathetic response and build friendships.
So a very big part of the work of the Parent Circle is to work in schools. And an Israeli and a Palestinian go into a classroom, usually 16 and 17-year-old, because they're about to go to the army. And it's maybe the first time in their lives that they've ever met a Palestinian or heard a narrative of a Palestinian. So I'm not sure exactly how many we will do this year because this is difficult, but we've also been doing Zooms to schools. It's very important to talk to kids. But it's just as important to talk to adults because they have to influence the kids. And we can't have a next generation that's brought up on rubbish values of the parents. So it's just as important for me. I feel, you know, they did some research in Ireland, and the research actually showed that it was more important in many ways to convince the parents to give up this whole cycle of violence. And so I think both sides are equally important. And going into the occupied territories, if you go into a Palestinian home, and I do this a lot, in the beginning they look at you and they don't understand exactly who you are, because who have they ever met in their lives? They've met settlers and soldiers. They haven't met some mother that comes along to talk to them. And so there are hundreds of these meetings, and the message gets spread. And this program that Layla was talking about, the parallel narrative, is something that you should explore. It's an extraordinary program of watching. We have more than 1,000 graduates from this alumni, and they go into their villages and into their homes on both sides and spread this message. And for children, we have a summer camp. By the way, the summer camp, I hope we're going to be able to have at the end of July. And if we do, we've got some chefs that are coming and to volunteer to cook with the kids. And we have something like 40 kids already that want to come to the summer camp. And for them, it's so important because there's a 14 to 18-year-old group of kids who start the summer camps, and like my grandson, suddenly want to be facilitators, and then go on to the next level, which is the young ambassadors. And the young ambassadors are very, very important because there are a lot of old backs like me who will not be around for so much longer, and we need another generation. And so, yes, we do take care of all generations. And I, of course, have a soft spot for the women's group because I think women have to come to the table, and to come to one of the meetings of the women's group that started off with just like 25 women from the parents' circle and now has more than 100 women from within the parents' circle who meet often and have gone through a reconciliation process. That's an incredible gift that we have for people around.
I think the most important thing, as Robi said, is talking to our mothers, because the mothers is very important in our families as Palestinian. The children look to their mothers as simple for everything. Like most of the times I didn't tell my children what to do, but I find that they act like me without, they act like me without telling even them to act like me, but I found that they do it. So I think this is the most important thing that we do in our organization.
A question from Leah, and there's tons of questions. We're not going to get to them all. Maybe some of them we'll respond to after the webinar, and we can send them to people. There's also Christopher is putting up a lot of links in the chat box about more information about the questions that you're asking. Robi, what was Israel like politically? This is from Leah. What was Israel like politically when you came, and how has it now changed? And Layla, how has your and the greater Palestinian community's situation changed in your lifetime?
Well, I came to Israel as a volunteer in the Six-Day War. Mind you, by the time I got here, the Six-Day War was over. It was a very different time in Israel. There was a sense of euphoria. I remember I came to the kibbutz and I said to them, wow, this is the time to make peace. This is the time to give back. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Of course, what did I know? I hadn't been living here. I hadn't been digging graves, mass graves, because they thought that was going to be the end in the Six-Day War. So that's terribly easy to be self-satisfied and give everybody else advice. I wish they'd listened, but on the other hand, I also didn't really understand what it was like to live here. The country is becoming much more radical and polarized. And I think it's like the world, you know, we all are going to be going through, who knows what's going to come out of this corona. There've been the most extraordinary acts of kindness that I've personally experienced from people who I don't know, who came and did my shopping and, you know, jumped across the road because they thought they might give me corona. And somebody from London who ordered vegetables for me. I don't know, thought I couldn't buy vegetables. So I got an industrial quantity of vegetables. And my neighbor, you know, and so maybe we could carry this on with us. Can you imagine how extraordinary that would be? How extraordinary that over a holiday, somebody just sends you some flowers and puts it outside your door. And to say, you know, I'm thinking about you, I know we can't meet. How extraordinary if we would continue with these little acts of kindness. And now you are in such a situation with what is happening. I watch what's happening in Philadelphia and in New York and in Seattle, all over. Can you imagine if you reached out without being a privileged white face and spoke to people and really listened to what they have to say about how they feel with empathy, if they had, in the Black community, how different things could have been. So, you know, I don't want to sound like I'm preaching, but I think we have to go on with what we are, and as difficult as it is in Israel, and if we have this annexation, and I beg you to write to your congressman and tell them how terrible this act of annexation is in the long term for Israel, even if you don't care about the Palestinians, and I care deeply. I do not want to live in another apartheid state, and that's what will happen.
Layla, did you want to add anything?
Sorry,
The question,
if
the
you're...
question was to you too about how the Palestinian community has changed in your lifetime today, where it was, I guess, before your son was killed.
At that time, when the second uprising was started, it was...
Just hold the microphone close to your mouth, Layla.
Sure.
Okay.
When the second uprising, sorry, to start, it was the first time I was live in that situation, because in Jordan, you know, we didn't face any kind of this situation before, so it was crazy for me to live like that. And we was expect this will end just a few days, but unfortunately that takes a long time, and we lost many people who were died or go to jail or whatever. And that was so hard for the Palestinian to really could handle. Most of the women or the people I know from the parents' circle, they lost their beloved ones in that time. And I think now the people start to feel, or they try to find peace, because they find that the fight will bring much more people to death. And this is not the way that we want to end this situation. We want to have all the people that we loved around us, but at the same time, we want to live like any normal people. I will tell you a small story. When I came from Jordan, I remember maybe after 1 week, I went with my husband to Hebron, and we went to walk on the street. Then suddenly there were 5 Israeli soldiers came to the way. So I was hide behind the back of my husband and start to cry. And then he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, "I'm so afraid they will shoot us." And he said, "Why?" I told him, "I don't know, but this is what we saw on the TV." And he said, don't be stupid. This will never happen. And you make me very impressed. People look at us, and I told him, "I don't care about people. I care about me. They will shoot me." And he said, "Why?" I told him, "I don't know." So I was shocked when they walk and they gone. And I was look behind me, and I saw them gone. And he said, "Did you see? They will never kill us. Why they will kill us?" I told him, "I don't know why, but this is what we saw on the TV." So I think, or not, I think, I'm really so sure that the media sometimes make the things much more worse. Not just the soldiers, not just the government, even when they try to like convince you of something and it's not exist, this will make you much more really terrible. And there's another story. After I became a member in the forum, they asked me to went to a school for the girls who will want to go to the army. They are at age of 17. I was really, really confused a little bit because for me, soldiers and schools and children at that time age, I didn't talk to anyone at that age. So I would stay all the night, woke up thinking, what should I talk to them about? What should I tell them? How could I act with them? But in the end, I said they are at the same age of my daughter. So I will talk to them as I talk to my daughter. And when I went there, I saw them really so nice girls with that uniform that I didn't like, but I didn't care about what they were. But I think about them because they are girls at the same age of mine, girl. So when we start to talk and tell our personal stories, at the end, they start to ask me questions. And one of them, she said to me, I want to ask you, what do you want us to do? I told her, look, I really look to you as my daughter and you are at the same age of her, and I will never tell her what to do in her life. I maybe could give her advice, but I will never tell her what to do really in her life. So I can't tell you to go to army or not, because this is your life and this is a law you should go through. But the only thing that I could advise you, that when you be in a checkpoint or whatever you will be, deal with any person. Don't look to his background, if he's Muslim or Christian, if he's black or white, whatever he is, look at him as just a human. And this is the most thing that I could really just tell you about. And she started to cry, and I was really shocked because that was helped me. She didn't know that was helped me a lot to understand the minds of the soldiers who stopped us that day and didn't allow us to move. They were at the same age of those girls. And I realized that they are victims. They are victims of the law. They are victims of their leaders, because when you put a child at the age of 17 or 18 in that crazy situation with a gun, sometimes maybe it's taller than them, I think they will do much more than this. So that gave me a chance to really forgive those soldiers. Thank you.
Sounds like you had a really big impact on those women, and you've had a huge impact on everybody here today. I just want to read one comment from Ruth, who said, thank you for your courage and deep humanity and for sharing your peace work with us in the diaspora. I will do all that I can to work towards a just solution for Palestinians and Israelis so that they can live together in their respective lands. And I wish we could go on forever. This has been the fastest hour ever. A lot of people have been asking about how they can help. There are people from the UK and from Canada and from US joining us today. And Christopher has put in some links in the chat box. You can follow us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter. Please sign up for our newsletter. The American Friends of the Parent Circle is the largest supporter of the Parent Circle's activities. So obviously we need your financial help as well. Feel free to make donations online. All the information is in the chat box. The summer camp that Robi was talking about is in need of funding this year. And all of the projects, the one that Layla described, the PNE, the one that so greatly impacted her life, is also a great project you can support. And dialogue meetings, just like you heard Layla and Robi talking now, that's what they do. They go into schools, they speak to preparatory pre-army groups that Layla described, and invite us to your communities. So we can do a webinar like this for your churches, your synagogues, your mosques, your universities, your conferences. We're happy to bring two people to your community to share these stories. And I just want to take a minute and say thank you so much to Robi and Layla for being with us here today, all of you who have been with us today as well. We're so grateful. I know it's a hard day. I hope that this has been able to change the tone, and please share these messages with everyone that you speak with today and how we can use this to do our own healing here in the US.
And I just wanted to say thank you to you and Christopher, because you are just 2 stars. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christopher, too, for organizing everything behind the scenes.
Yeah, I want to thank you,
Thank you, Robi.
Christopher, and thank you, Robi and Sherry, and thank everyone who give us his time to sit and listen to our stories. Thank you so much.